Call to order, Town of Prescott Valley Study Session, February 9th, 2023. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Leyva is not here. Councilmember Greer? Here. Councilmember Dickinson?
Here.
Councilmember Hepperly?
Here.
Councilmember Schumacher's not here. Vice Mayor Hunt?
Here.
Mayor Plaguta?
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, ma'am. First item up, Mr. Wadsworth, Water and Sewer Rate Study. Welcome, sir.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Today we have Will Dan present to actually give the presentation on the sewer and rate study fee. And Dan, I understand he was here earlier, but he's not here in the room at this moment. So I don't know, can we go on to the? He was here. Yeah, that's what I heard, but okay, we can.
If you want to pivot to item 2B,
We can do that if it's
up to you.
okay. Tracy's doing that one and all.
Oh, he's coming in?
He's coming in?
All right. JK.
All right, put that back up there.
No worries, sir. All eyes on you. That's all.
Yeah, so this is Dan Jackson. He's with Will Dan. We contracted with them to do the water and sewer rate study, and there are other components to that as well that he will probably touch upon. But Will Dan has done these studies all across the country. They've done a lot of them in Arizona. So he's very qualified, and I'll just go ahead and turn it over to Dan and let him run the show for you.
Thank you.
Welcome, sir.
Thanks. The door was locked out there. I thought you all were trying to tell me something. Anyway, I do appreciate the chance to come for you and talk with you tonight about your water and wastewater rate structure. As Neil indicated, you all did engage our firm to do a comprehensive water and wastewater rate study and long-term financial plan. This kind of study is a lot more than just a financial study. It involves policy decisions with regards to how you want to run your water and wastewater utility. In many senses, a study of this nature is really just arithmetic. You set the policy decisions, you make the critical decisions with regards to infrastructure investment and how you want to charge for that service. And then once that direction is brought to us, we end up developing a financial plan that will help you meet those goals. Any financial plan is going to be as good as its goals, including this plan itself. Now, what I'm going to present to you tonight is an introduction to the rate plan that we have developed for the town. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the industry in general, because I think it's very important for decision makers such as you to understand the dynamics of what's happening in the industry itself. You'll find out that a lot of things that are happening in the water industry are simply beyond your control, and you have to react to it in order to continue to provide an acceptable level of service. Then I'm going to show your rates and present a brief indication of how your rates compare to neighboring communities, because that's a common question that's asked in presentations just as this. Then I'll talk a little bit about your volumes and your costs. In other words, how much water are you producing and how much does it cost you to produce it? Once we provide that information, we're then going to talk about some general alternative rate options for you to consider. We will look to you for some general direction on which rate options you think might be the most appropriate ones for the cities. We're not going to present any specific rate plans tonight. I mean, this is a staged process here, and there's a lot of information to go over, and these are not the kind of decisions that are made lightly or carefully. They're only made after very, very careful consideration. So after we present that, it'll give you an opportunity to review what we've told you, go over the information that we've provided tonight, and then maybe present some feedback to us, at which time we'll come back and present you some specific rate proposals. So I want to start this presentation by talking a little bit about what's happening in the industry. It's very important to understand that water is a precious and diminishing natural resource. It's something that we literally can't live without. I think we as Americans should be very, very proud of the fact that we have this resource that we can't live without at a remarkably low cost. particularly when you consider the fact that 70% of the households in the world do not have running water. We not only have it, it's at a relatively cheap cost. Now, unfortunately, here in the 21st century, that cost is going up. Water utilities all around the country are raising their rates at a rate of 5 to 6% per year. And that trend is expected to continue, and that trend is certainly happening here in Arizona. I work for over 45 cities here in the state of Arizona, and I can tell you most assuredly that that's happening here. As a matter of fact, the American Water Works Association anticipates that water and sewer rates across the country are going to triple in the next 15 years. Now, why is this happening? It's happening for a very specific reason. You try to run your water and sewer operation like a business. After all, you're producing a product. You know, water is like a McDonald's hamburger or a gallon of gasoline or anything else. It costs you money to prepare that product and make it available to your customers, and you want the rates that you charge for that service to cover all of those costs. Well, guess what? Like any other business, your costs are going up due to a lot of factors that are simply beyond your control. Things like inflation. Cost of everything has been going up 3 to 6% a year. Also, keep in mind that a major factor is the capital improvement investment that you need to make in your system. It costs millions of dollars to build a water system, to push that water from its source, to treat it, to make it drinkable, and to get it to your household. Water has to be available in a household anytime a person wants it. The vast majority of the cost involved in producing water is not the molecules of water itself. It is the infrastructure that makes it available to consumers whenever they want to use it. And so, like any other infrastructure, it wears out over time. And so the prudent utility has to make continued capital investments to assure that the quality of service is reliable and guaranteed. Now, I work for a lot of utilities that have incredibly low rates. They have low rates because they don't put any money into their system. And so they're looking at, they're this far away from catastrophic failure. It's kind of like saying I could save $100 by not changing the oil in my car. Well, you could do that, but then a year later, your engine's going to blow out. One other thing to keep in mind about rates and how they compare to other utilities, 30 to 40% of utilities charge rates that do not cover their costs. So just because another utility's rates are lower, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're running a more efficient operation. It might mean that they're using their general fund to subsidize their water and sewer rates. Well, as a famous politician once said, the problem with subsidies is that sooner or later you run out of other people's money. You in the town of Prescott Valley do not subsidize your rates, and the rate plans that we present to you will enable you to continue to not subsidize them. Okay, we've talked about the industry. Let's now talk about the town of Prescott Valley. Remember what I said earlier, the average utility is raising its rates 5 to 6% a year. The town of Prescott Valley has not had to adjust its rates since 2017. You've gone 6 years without a rate adjustment. I can tell you very few utilities in the state of Arizona can make that claim. However, unfortunately, you haven't been able to repeal the laws of economics. Operating costs are continuing to go up. Capital costs are going up. And so, and the city has identified the need to fund as much as $51 million in capital improvements over the next 5 years. Now, one of the benefits of running a water utility is that the money that you collect from your ratepayers is invested right back into the community. This $51 million will be used to construct assets that will serve you, your children, your grandchildren, maybe even your great-grandchildren. It is an investment in the future of the town of Prescott Valley, but it comes at a cost. It has to be funded by water and sewer rates. So all of those factors are contributing to the need to adjust to do a new long-term water and wastewater rate plan. Okay, let's talk about the rates themselves. How do you charge for water service here in the town? Well, every customer has a water meter. The vast majority of water meters are 5/8 by 3/4 inch. That's a typical residential meter. And you charge a base charge for that of $9 a month for water service. If you have a larger meter, you charge a larger volume rate, base charge per month. Very common, done all over the country. You also charge a rate for every 1,000 gallons of water that's used. It's based on a concept called an inverted block. It is intended to encourage conservation. The idea behind your rate structure is that the more water people use, the more they pay. it provides a financial disincentive for using greater amounts of water. But at the same time, the people who use the least amount of water pay the least for it. We have an old saying, we economists have a saying, that is that if you raise the price of something, you get less of it. And so you charge more for greater usage of water. That encourages people to use this precious resource very, very prudently. Now, on the wastewater side, you also charge a monthly base charge, and you charge a volume rate per 1,000 gallons. And that's based on a concept called a winter average. The idea is that not all the wastewater that you use goes back in, not all the water that you use goes back into the wastewater system. Some of it is used for non-wastewater purposes. And so the idea of a winter average is it allows you to factor out the water that is not used for outdoor purposes, because it takes the water that you use in the wintertime and assumes that all that water goes back into the sewer system. And so in the summer months, any water that you use above that amount is considered to be water that is not returned to the sewer system and not charged for. Well, so that's all great, but the question most people have is, how much do I actually pay for water service here? What does it cost me to get water? Well, the average residential ratepayer here in the town of Prescott Valley uses somewhere around 5,000 gallons of water and sewer service a month. That customer pays a total of $52.82 for that service. How does that compare to other communities? This chart right here compares various communities here in the state of Arizona at 5,000 gallons. As you can see, you're above a couple, like Tempe and Phoenix and Douglas, which is down in the border, but you're below many other communities, like you're significantly less than Flagstaff, you're less than Camp Verde, you're less than Chino Valley, you're significantly less than Prescott and Sedona. Now, the purpose of this chart is not to tell you that, hey, your rates are really low compared to everybody else, so you ought to raise your rates. That's not the purpose of this chart. The purpose of this chart is to answer the question, are what we ask our ratepayers to pay disproportionate to what other people in Arizona are paying for water and wastewater service? The answer is clearly no, you're not. Now, I know there's 100 cities in Arizona, but I mean, this is what I think is a reasonable sample of similar type cities to the town of Prescott Valley. And it's also, I think, very notable that your most immediate neighbors charge rates that are not only higher than yours, they're fairly significantly higher than yours. Okay, just a little background on the system. You have about 23,454 water customers. The vast majority of them, almost 23,000 of them, are 1 inch or below. Those are typically residential customers. It's very uncommon to see a residential customer have a meter greater than 1 inch. That'd be a heck of a house they'd live in if you did. But the larger meters, 1.5 and above, are generally your commercial meters. So yeah, to no great surprise, the vast majority of your customers are residential. You're anticipated to have some fairly significant growth here. Our long-term financial plan, we're forecasting for a 10-year period, and we're forecasting you're going to grow at a rate of about around 500 new accounts per year. That's a very healthy growth rate, and that's fully factored in to the long-term financial plan. On your consumption side, consumption's kind of funny. Water consumption doesn't always go up in a straight line, even if you add new customers, because water consumption is very heavily dependent on weather. In a wet year, people are going to use less water. In a dry year or a hot year, people are going to use more water. Not any more complicated than that. Now, all you got to do is tell me which years in the future are going to be wet and which are going to be dry. Once we have that figured out, we'll be able to tell you exactly how much water is used. In the meantime, though, we generally forecast assuming that most years are going to be fairly consistent or fairly normal. So as you can see in the prior years, 2019 through 2022, your usage generally trended up, and then it came down again in 2023, which indicated to me that the weather in the last 12 months was a little bit cooler than normal. Okay, let's now talk about your costs. Well, what we've done is we've developed a long-term 10-year forecast of all of your expenses and all of your revenues. A forecast is not a guarantee. A forecast is a prediction based on a series of reasonable assumptions about the future. What are some of the assumptions that we used in developing our long-term forecast? Well, we assume that most of your costs are going to continue to go up at 3 to 5% a year. I think that's a reasonable thing to assume. After all, cost of everything goes up by that much a year just due to basic inflation. In the water business, there are certain expenses like chemicals and electricity and insurance that go up at rates higher than inflation. We've factored that into our model. Our model has the ability to take every single line item in your budget and forecast it for a 10-year period based on a driver that we assign to it. It's really cool. I'll show it to you sometime. But what it does is it allows us to take those expenses that increase at higher rates and factor that fully into your long-term financial plan. You use an operating company to manage most of your system. We assume that you continue to do that. That's very prudent. Many utilities do that. So one of the benefits is that you've got some debt on your system that's going to be retired in the next 5 years. And that's good because that's going to free up some of your cash, which is going to lessen the need for rate adjustments. We're assuming that you're going to want to maintain your basic financial indicators like fund balance, and you're going to want to limit your reserve drawdown. You know, your fund is healthy right now. We're going to assume you want to keep it healthy. But there is one factor more than any other that is going to drive your long-term rate plan, and that is your capital improvement needs. How much are you going to fund? You know, capital improvement plans impact rates in 3 ways. How much do you pay? Are you going to pay? When are you going to pay it? And how are you going to finance it? Those 3, and there is a lot of subjectivity to those particular decisions. You know, running a water system is like running a house. I mean, we all have a long list of things we'd like to do in our homes, but there's only a limited amount of money. So we have to sometimes prioritize what we're going to do and decide what we're going to do this year, do this next year. You know, maybe we don't buy the new car next year. Maybe we leave it another year or two. All those decisions go into what you ultimately set your rates at. But fundamentally in our rate plan, we're assuming that you're going to make the basic decisions that are going to be necessary to ensure that the system is as well run tomorrow as it is today. And I will tell you, as somebody who has worked for 200 cities around the country, you have a very, very well-run water and wastewater system here in the town. You should be proud of it. This is just a list of all the capital improvement projects that the town has identified over the next 5 years. Now, I'm just a financial guy, so you can ask me about these projects and I won't know anything about them. All I know is how much they cost. That's the important thing as far as I'm concerned. But as you can see, it's a lot of investment because it costs a lot of money to maintain water, to develop water, to find it, to transport it, and to assure that it's going to be available to your ratepayers. Yeah, it's all underground, and a lot of people don't see it. That doesn't mean it isn't there, and that doesn't mean it doesn't result in a lot of additional cost. Now, the town of Prescott Valley. I'm sorry, I was in Chino earlier today. The town of do it again. The town of Prescott Valley has made a lot of very prudent financial decisions that have minimized the need to do a new long-term rate plan. You have $52 million of capital improvements that you need. However, a large percentage of that are due to be funded through your capacity fees. Those are the fees that you charge new connections that come into your system. It was a very prudent decision because it has given you a lot of money that you're going to use to underwrite these capital costs. How capital plans impact rates is based on how much debt you have to issue. This chart right here shows you that of the $52 million of capital financing, only $17 million of it is going to have to come from new debt. Yeah, you're going to have to fund that new debt with your rates, but $17 million is a lot less than $52 million, and that's going to benefit your long-term rate plan. Now, the other thing is, what is the timing? Unfortunately, a lot of debt has to be issued in the next couple of years. And so that means that you're going to start having a lot of new debt coming online in the next few years. So you've got to set your rate plan at a point where you can repay the annual principal and interest that's going to come from these new debt issues. So this right here is just a depiction of your forecast cost of service for the next 10 years. This bar chart is composed of several different components. The first is operating expenses, which is the red. As you can see, it goes up fairly steadily each year because costs go up. The green portion is your capital outlays. Those are capital expenditures for things that you don't issue debt for, things like buying new trucks or new computers or new pumps and things like that. Every utility does it. I mean, obviously you don't issue a bond to buy a new truck, but it is a capital expenditure and it is included in the rate plan. And then the purple component is your debt service. Yeah, your debt service goes up, but thanks to your prudent financial management over the past couple of years, the debt service is not going up as much as you otherwise might think it would go up. Okay, we've established a few things in this presentation. We established the fact that you're a growing community and you're going to continue to grow, that you've got a well-run financial system, and that you want to make the investment that is necessary to keep your system well-run. So, what kind of rate plans are we talking about? Well, this is where it gets a little bit more subjective, because there is no such thing as a single rate plan that is the ultimate perfect rate plan for everybody. You know, we build this great financial model, but this model doesn't spit out some magical rate plan that is the perfect plan for everybody. Rate making, I often say, is as much an art as it is a science. There's a lot of different rate plans you could put into effect that will get you the revenue you need to run your system. The key question that you would have is, what is the most fair, just, and reasonable rate plan? And you know what? The answer is going to be different for every utility. The bottom line, though, is that you as a council and you as a community have a lot of flexibility to determine what is going to be the most appropriate rate plan for your given community. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to present to you some general rate options for you to consider. Again, consider it, give us some feedback, and then we'll come back with some specific numbers at our next presentation. But as I said at the outset of this presentation, the rate plan should be designed to meet the goals that you set for your water and sewer utility. What are some of the goals that you want this rate plan to accomplish? Well, I would say probably one of the first goals is that you want a rate plan that's going to appropriately fund your system. I mean, a rate plan that doesn't give you enough revenue to meet your costs is probably not a very good rate plan. You want to be able to have rates that cover your operating costs, that maintain your fund balances, and that give you the ability to repair and maintain your infrastructure. Another very important goal to meet is to encourage conservation. Water is valuable. Water is becoming more valuable in the 21st century. You may want to consider a rate plan that fully recognizes the value of that water and ensures that people that use water use it as prudently as possible. But you have to balance the need for conservation with the need to financially maintain your system. You know, water is a funny business. You're in the business of producing a product that you want to get your customers not to buy. So you have to have this balancing act between, well, you want to encourage conservation, but you also need to generate revenues. So it's a balancing act. There's a third alternative, and that is encourage economic development. I've had many a client over my last 30 plus years say to me, why don't we just raise rates on commercial customers and not raise rates on residential customers? Well, that's all well and good, but the problem you face is that if you set rates too high for non-residential customers, you run the risk of discouraging economic development. And so you have to balance that. Another is the community goals that you might want to meet. For example, some communities have what is called a lifeline rate. It is a rate that is a special bargain for either senior citizens or low-income citizens, and we'll talk more about that a little bit more. So as you can see, rate plans are not just financial plans. They're social and community plans too, and they are meant to achieve the objectives that you set for your water and sewer utility. So let's talk about some of the potential alternatives. The first alternative is that you say, you know what, we like the rate plan that we've got. We want to maintain the status quo. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be rate adjustments. There will be. However, what the status quo option is it says, we're going to keep the minimum charges the way they are. We're going to keep the volume rates the way they are with the blocks they are. We're just going to do percentage increases each year. There are a lot of advantages to doing that. It's easy to understand. It's very consistent. It's what you've always done. There is a fairness argument that says, you know what? whatever you're paying this year, you're going to pay X% more next year, no matter how much water you use. There's a fairness element to that. And this rate plan has been very successful in the past. It's gotten you the revenues you need for a lot of years. So yes, it has to go up, but there are advantages to doing that. There are some disadvantages or some challenges as well of maintaining the status quo. One is that, as we're about to see, your current rate plan, while it encourages conservation, it's not as aggressive as it might otherwise be. Secondly, there is no gallon allowance, there's no low-income benefit, nothing like that. So maintaining the status quo is just that. It is maintaining the status quo. So let's talk about another option. Another option is that you adjust your volume tiers. Now, each of your meter sizes has a different volume tier. That's because the larger the meter, the more water they generally use. So you've got larger tiers for larger customers. But one of the interesting things about your rate plan is that for your residential customers, who are generally your 5/8 and 1-inch customers, yeah, there are a few commercial customers spread in there, but they're overwhelmingly residential. Your first tier goes from 0 to 9,000 gallons, but your average usage is just under 5,000 gallons. So a residential customer has to use more than twice the average before they even get into the conservation tier. So like I said, it does encourage conservation, but only a very, very few customers pay the conservation rates under your current tier. Same thing is true with your 3/4 inch and your 1-inch customers. You have to use twice the average before you even get into the tier. That tells us maybe we ought to consider lowering that first tier a little bit. You know what many cities do? They set the first tier at the average usage. So what that essentially means is that you don't pay a conservation rate until you are using above the average for water in your community. That would be, for the town of Prescott Valley, that would be 5,000 gallons. And then the second tier would be up to double the average, up to 10,000 gallons. And the third tier would be anything above 10,000 gallons. Now, I've seen communities that have 10 rate blocks. So you have a lot of discretion here, but it is up to you to decide the extent to which you want to encourage conservation and the extent to which you want to try to get people to recognize the preciousness of this water resource. So that is a potential alternative. A second alternative is to take your volume rates themselves and make them more aggressive. If you look at the bottom of this slide right here, you can see your first volume rate is $3.21 per 1,000 gallons. Then it goes up in the second tier to $3.85. That's a 20% increase. And then the third tier goes up to $5.01. That's a 30% increase. Many cities do more aggressive increases in the tiers. They do like a 50% increase in the second tier and then another 50% increase in the third tier. Now, the advantage of that is that it is going to really encourage water conservation because people that use large amounts of water are going to see their bills go way up. The disadvantage of that is that people who use large amounts of water are going to see their bills go way up. And they're not going to be happy about it. And they're probably going to let you know that they're not very happy about it. And so, yes, it does implement a significant disadvantage or disincentive to customers who use large amounts of water. So if you do this, and many communities do, just do that with the understanding and expectation that it's going to really impact your high volume users. But then again, that's exactly what it's designed to do. Another thing that you could do is set your base charges on something called a meter equivalency. See, an 8-inch meter is the equivalent in the system of about 30 5/8-inch meters. The same flow on one NH meter is the flow that goes through 30 5/8-inch meters. It's just due to dynamics and other stuff that I don't really understand. But what many cities do is they set their 5/8-inch rate at $9, and then they set their 8-inch rate at 30 times that. Because they say, well, if you're using 30 times the amount of water as a 5/8-inch meter, you ought to be paying a base charge at 30 times the amount. So what I've shown on this chart is what those rates would be, what those base charges would be if you adopted an approach like that. Now, the advantage of that is that The larger volume users would be paying a base charge more in line with what their demand on the system is. And that means that the adjustments on the smaller meters would be a little bit less. So that is another thing for you to think about. Another potential rate plan is this lifeline rate that I mentioned earlier. The concept of a lifeline rate is that you recognize that there are some people in a community that are low income or on fixed income, and so you do your best to try to take that into consideration and give them a benefit. Many communities have what's called a senior citizen rate, where if you reach a certain age, say 65, then you get a discount on your monthly bill. It's typically 10 to 20%, but you could set it at whatever you want it to be. Other communities have what they call a low income rate, where if you meet some criteria of low income, then you get a break on your rate as well. There are many benefits to this. One benefit is that it does reach out to the neediest in your community and ensure that to the best extent possible, you are recognizing that it is difficult to pay these kind of water bills and you're doing everything that you can to try to lessen the impact on them. It also makes the point that you're trying to make the rate as fair, just, and reasonable as possible. But there are some challenges to a rate such as this. One is that if you give a break to one section of the community, you have to increase the charges to the other section to make up the difference. And so that can be controversial. Second thing is that sometimes it's very difficult to define what a low income rate is. What's the definition of low income? Well, I mean, there are general standards for that, but you could set it at what you want, but it also puts you in the position of trying to verify what a low-income customer's actual income is. It does, unfortunately, I've seen this in some communities, it does open up the potential for some kind of fraud. Sometimes I've seen instances in other cities where people will sign up for water service in their grandmother's name and use their grandmother's income, even though they're not really the person using the water service. So that's something that you have to look out for. Senior citizen rate, as I get older, I get a lot more sympathetic to that idea. But the challenge of a senior citizen rate is that everybody over a certain age gets it. Warren Buffett is over 65. If he had a house in your community, he'd get the senior citizen rate. Is that fair? I mean, that's a question that you have to ask yourself. So that is, in one sense, the beauty of rate designs. There is no right or wrong plan. There is what you believe is in the best interest of your community. And all of these factors go into deciding what that rate plan is going to be. So like I said earlier, we ask that you look these plans over, think about it, provide us some feedback, and then at our next presentation in the next month or so, we'll come back to you with specific rate plans that will meet the different alternatives you look at, and then you will ultimately choose what option you would like. You may recall that you also engaged us to do a few other studies as well. I just want to give you a very brief update on that. We're doing a stormwater study for you all, where we're going to be recommending a monthly stormwater fee for the community. The stormwater study is very dependent on something called impervious surface area data. Without going into a lot of detail, what that is that's just the pavement data, mostly that your commercial businesses have, like parking lots and things like that. We're still trying to compile that data. It's been very difficult to do. We're going to get it. You've got the data. It just is taking a little longer than we anticipated. But once we get that, we'll be able to present to you some stormwater alternatives. We're also looking at your water resource fee analysis, but we need to make sure that any water resource fee does not double dip with your capacity fees. And then finally, we're holding back on looking at some of your non-rate fee options because we don't want to overload you with information right now. It's probably best to look at the water and sewer rates first and then come back and look at the non-rate fees at a later time. But the process going forward is this. Once you give us some feedback on what you'd like to see in terms of rate plans, we'll come back before you with another presentation that will present you with a couple of different rate plan alternatives. We're going to probably recommend a 5-year plan. A plan to implement rates over a 5-year period that minimizes the impact on your ratepayers on an annual basis. After that, once you choose the plan that you think is the most appropriate one for the community, you would adopt by something called a notice of intent. Now we get into the state statutes. The state of Arizona has a specific set of guidelines for how communities can adjust their water and sewer rates. First thing you have to do is you have to pass something called a notice of intent. That does not obligate you to increase rates. It says we're going to start a procedural clock whereby we're going to look at this in more detail. 60 days after you do the notice of intent, you have to have a public hearing where you get the true privilege of having me come back here and tell you all this again. And then you open the floor up for public comments on the appropriateness of the rate plan that you have chosen. After that public hearing, at that point in time, or any point afterwards, you can then vote to adopt the rate plan. And if you adopt it, the rate plan would go into effect 30 days after that. So you're probably not at this point looking at adopting a new rate plan before the fall at the earliest. And that's probably in the best interest of the community because it's generally a better idea to adjust rates in the fall than in the summer. Because the problem with adjusting rates in the summer is that people will think the entire difference between their June bill and their May bill is the rate increase, and it's not. It's due to the fact that people use more water in June. I can't tell you specifically right now what the rate adjustments will be. I can tell you that there will be rate adjustments. I do not believe that they will be any worse than what other communities have seen because the challenges that you're facing are the same challenges that every other community in the state of Arizona is facing and every other community in the United States is facing. I know these are not easy decisions to make, but the right decision is not always the most popular one, and it's not always the decision that most people want, but it would be in the best interest of the community. So that's where we stand right now with regards to the rate study. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have at this time.
Vice Mayor, you want to start us off?
Great job, Dan.
Thank you.
And thank you for the shout outs to Neil and his team and Jacobs and their team. And also Katie, when you said we had prudent financial management. My question is, Neil, we raised the rate in 2017. How much did we raise it then?
I do not have that information at my fingertips. I do know that back at that time, prior to that, we were being fairly consistent with annual increases. And since that was probably towards the end of the last one we did, it was probably only a couple of percent, maybe 2% or something. I couldn't tell you specifically without going back and looking it up, though.
That's something you can get us, though, what the percentage increase was. I'd be interested in knowing that. I don't know if I would support just a senior low income and not a family low income, if the family was low income. And I don't like the idea of all seniors getting it reduced, like you said. So that was interesting. And then also, what's an example of a non-rate fee options analysis? Would that be a project?
Well, you collect revenue from your water and sewer utility from two ways. One is your rates. The other is what we call non-rates. Those are fees for special services, a hookup fee, a turn-on fee, a turn-off fee, a late payment penalty, if somebody wants their meter checked, special services. It's not a ton of revenue, but it's not an insignificant amount of revenue either. So those are the fees that you charge for those special services.
This would be in the area of people outside the county getting water. That fee, right, would fall under there?
No, this would be your customer base. Somebody who lives in the town wants to have their meter checked. You would charge a fee for that. Somebody turning on service or turning off service, even in the town. So.
Thank you, Dan.
Sure.
Sir, I definitely think that we should focus more on the conservation efforts of what we've done previously, which are probably non-significant in regards to a tiered system. So I definitely want to see something on what that looks like to have some actual teeth in the game in regards to encouraging conservation. When it comes to the low income or fixed income, I didn't know if there was a way to, or if there's any communities that you've ever heard of that give a discount to disabled vets that are on a
Yes.
fixed income. Way that
We've
we
seen
can maybe
those.
work that in to what we have and just kind of see what that would look like if, when you came back to us, say, hey, we estimate this percentage to be low income, this percentage to be disabled vets, and how that would affect the overall numbers of, as you said, if you give a discount here, we have to raise it a little bit higher to offset it here. Just kind of, if that's even a way to track, I don't know.
Sure.
I just know Yavapai County has the largest veterans, number of population, so I think we should definitely address that. So if we could look into that, that would be
Okay.
great. Council, we have anything else? Other comments?
I've seen instances in various communities where the discounts are based on your income. It has nothing, it might be offered to a certain age group, but at the same time, you have to prove that you qualify as to, if your income is over a certain amount, then you don't qualify.
Right. And that's the challenge that the town staff would have, and that is verification, not only of that person's income, but ensuring that that person is in fact the person who is receiving the water service. I'm not saying it can't be done, but it does add a layer of complexity to the ability to provide a rate like that.
I think it's, oh, I'm sorry, Vice Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, Dan, other utilities do that though. So like the gas company has a lower rate for.
Yeah. So,
I think one of the glaring things that stood out was how significantly lower we are compared to
yes.
Chino Valley and Prescott. I mean, they're the closest communities to ours. And we just need to, I think the mindset from when you come back is we want to set up our future for success. We don't want them to think our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren are going to inherit something from Prescott Valley going, man, they totally dropped the ball when they had the opportunity to stay up to date with all the infrastructure. So
Right.
I think that's the plan moving forward. We just have to have that mindset.
Okay.
I think along with what the mayor is saying, we have a lot of new residents in the area that come from areas that the rates are a lot higher than, and coming here, they think they've got a bonanza. They've come into a community where they're not paying the rates that they were accustomed to paying. So I think that we might not see as much of a problem raising the rates as what we might be thinking.
I can tell you as a resident of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, I would trade places with you in a minute with regards to rates, because I pay about double what you pay for 5,000 gallons of water and sewer service. But then again, my town hasn't hired me. But
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
all right. Thank you.
Next up, Wadsworth, you're handing this one off?
Thank you very much. Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council, this is intended to be an update on where we're contemplating going as far as our recharge projects here in town. I thought it appropriate to start with this, just to remind you, we're doing a lot of stuff, and just kind of give you an overall view of everything that we're accomplishing. Just kind of zoom in though, today's talk focuses on this first point here, the Agua Fria recharge and adjacent area recharge projects that we've got currently going on. I'm going to give you just a reminder of what we're currently doing and then what we're looking at accomplishing in the near future and far future, hopefully. Current recharge facilities, we'll start off looking at the in-stream facility, which is the Agua Fria riverbed downstream from the wastewater treatment plant on the east side of town. That is a constructed recharge facility. It is 2.2 miles long, and we can achieve a maximum credit volume per year of 1,200 acre feet. We send a lot more water down that reach than we get credit for. So we do have a lot of water available for other projects in the future. One thing about this particular reach is that with the constructed permit, we have to create breakable berms. So someone goes down, creates berms that during stormwater events break easily so that we're not actually impacting the natural flow of the river when there are additional flows in the river. We also have in the top of the map there, the North Plains Basins. They are 7 ponds that are immediately adjacent to the Agua Fria River on leased state land. And much like the riverbed and frankly throughout all of Prescott Valley, we have a lot of geologic sediments that are very tight, so clay-rich sediments. Those clays actually slow infiltration of water from the surface into the aquifer. So that kind of works against us when it comes to infiltration and recharge of our aquifer. So basically, as a hydrogeologist, my preference would be, okay, so we need to maximize the amount of surface area that we have available for our infiltration capacity. So obviously, we've got those 2 current facilities. Going to do a little math here. I apologize, but it's going to be simple math. It's the total effluent that we have available that we generate per year is about 2,900 acre feet, give or take. The annual recharge credits that we get from ADWR based on what we can document, what we've infiltrated in the basins and the river, it's between 1,500 to 1,600 acre feet depending on the year. That's what we've averaged the last 3 years. Recent maximum has been 1,700 plus. So that's what we get credit for. We have some reuse obligations that we have. So we send water to Stone Ridge Golf Course. We also send water to Mountain Valley Park, the lakes there. And that ends up being about 400 acre feet per year. So when you add that all up, run the total, that leaves us with about 900 acre feet, 800 to 900 acre feet, depending on the year, of effluent that we generate that we don't get credit for in any recharge facilities. So ideally, we would like to be able to get that number down a bit, and we've got plans to try to get that to happen. Also, I should point out to you that the strategic plan, the general plan, actually calls for that amount, about that amount of recharge increase over time as well. So we have plans to actually implement that should get us closer to that number. So just to give you an update too, this is not actually a project that is going on right now, but parts of it are constructed and we're designing infrastructure to support it. It's the recharge injection well, just to remind you where that's at. That's at Mountain Valley Park, just upstream from the 2 lakes. It's going to be engineered to inject effluent into the aquifer. So when we're doing our charge count here on the amount of effluent we get, we will not lose any of that effluent number to either evaporation into the atmosphere or transpiration into plant life at the surface. The well has been constructed, and that's it right there. I just took that picture last week. And we have a permit available. Pilot scale permit has been issued by ADWR. Well, like I said, we've got supporting infrastructure that's being designed. We will also need to make sure that we get PFAS treatment on the effluent going into this well. This well is a lot closer to our drinking water wells and the areas of our aquifer that flow into the cones of depression that serve those drinking water wells. So we want to make sure that PFAS treatment is on that well for the water going into the ground. So that covers what we are currently doing, what we've got plans actively going on right now to do to get that 900 additional acre feet into the ground. I'm delighted to show you this map and talk about what we would like to do to build out to maximize our surface area to try to get more effluent into the ground. So phase 1 here of our proposed facility change, We've already talked to ADWR. They've encouraged us on this project. We would like to change the permit from a constructed, so take out, no longer have to construct the berms, change it to a managed facility. We are also hoping to discharge upstream from where we currently discharge at the wastewater treatment facility, move that discharge point up to where the pipeline actually crosses the Agua Fria River going into North Plains. The reach then from that point all the way down to approximately where we think our new terminus would be with this new permit is about 4.95 miles, or perhaps longer. It depends on ADWR and their permitting process. So we're going to have twice as much surface area at least to get more water into the ground, into the aquifer at that area. All of this is dependent, of course, on model results to determine how many credits we can have available to us with this new facility. And of course, we would still have the injection well, and at least some portion of the North Plains would likely still be able to serve our purposes. It's not really clear exactly how much we would lose in North Plains. My anticipation would be we would lose a couple of the ponds, but we would still have some available to us. But that's kind of the earliest portion of it. Phase 2 is really exciting. As a hydrogeologist, I'm very excited about this because this gets us closer to our cones of depression. The workhorse portions of our aquifer would be better served by this. Phase 2 involves us constructing a discharge point into one of the excuse me, one of the tributaries that goes into the Agua Fria in Granville. And so that extends our reach to about 12 and a half miles or longer, depending on where that terminus point is. Obviously, much like the injection well, this requires PFAS treatment because obviously we're introducing our effluent into really important portions of our aquifer. Granville houses our central well field. That northern portion of the map there gets really close to our north well field. So we want to make sure we put the best quality water that we possibly can as close to our well fields as possible and minimize our impacts, balance the pumping and the cones of depression, and everybody's happy and much rejoicing happens. So this is a very exciting opportunity for us. It does require a little bit of infrastructure, actually quite a bit of infrastructure in the PFAS treatment and a little bit of additional pipeline. But we've run this by ADWR. They're excited to look at it and potentially work with us on it. So in summary, wanted to get this as brief as possible. We've got a couple of different timelines. We're working on the injection well right now, trying to get that set up. Plans are in the works there. We're going to be committing to the process shortly of modifying the permit to that shorter managed facility, and long term, hopefully we can get that additional 7.5 miles of added to the facility. So pretty exciting stuff. And that's all I've got for you today.
Ma'am, I just have a quick question. Can you describe, for those that may not know, and I might be one of them, what exactly would phase 2 look like if I was standing on site of, say, the beginning of the Agua Fria area? What would that look like to me? Would it just be an open trench, or what are you?
It would look like a running river, from a pipe. I mean, it's the really cool thing here, and we've had some internal discussions, is that opens up the opportunity for some riparian recreational activities that could go on. People could
Nearby?
I'm sorry.
A trail system could go along that?
Exactly. So that opens up opportunities on that scale. So, and there have been some, like I said, some discussions internally about how cool that would be.
Absolutely, I agree. Vice Mayor?
Tracy, thank you. I love your excitement.
This is what I get a kick out of. I love it.
So can you go back to that phase 2 map?
Certainly.
So I know we talked about more injection wells.
Mhm.
Where would other ones might be located?
That it probably what we would need to do, and there have been studies that have taken place in the past. I've looked through all those. Without knowing what the impact through the model would be for these reaches, we would need to be judicious in where we placed those. The subsurface, there may be opportunities to place them in the northeast portion of that reach. I'm sorry, I don't know the unit names yet, but there may be opportunities to place some wells in those areas. This is all dependent on what model results would be too. So that's why these models are really important. So that way we can make sure to run scenarios, maybe drop a well here or there, see what the impacts are to the rest of our facilities.
Out of curiosity, the 900 acre feet of effluent that we're not getting recharge credit for, does it get credited somewhere as recharge, or is it counting towards our overdraft?
It does not, to my knowledge, count towards either. It is
Okay, so
essentially
just wanna
surface
make-
water that flows past the terminus, and it is no longer our water.
Just like it just basically, as far as paper is concerned, it ceases to exist.
Precisely.
Okay.
That's my knowledge, to my knowledge of. I mean, there may be something that I haven't been exposed to yet from ADWR where they're calculating it.
We shouldn't give ADWR the idea, that's for sure.
Yeah, good call.
And I just want to point out that the rest of the council might not be as familiar with you as I am. I kind of take that for granted. Tracy is the Technical Advisory Committee Chair to the Upper Verde River Watershed Coalition, which I am the executive chair for. So I get to revel in your knowledge on a regular basis, and I really appreciate it. So thank you.
It's my pleasure to nerd out to you on a regular basis, ma'am.
Councilwoman?
Yes, that 900 acre feet per year, right?
It's per year, yes.
A lot.
It is. And, we've committed to trying to capture that as effluent credits. I mean, it's just water and, why not try to put it to good use and make sure that we're balancing our impacts on the aquifer as much as possible.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Wadsworth? Item 2C, PFAS remediation.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And so what I'd like to do now is I'm basically going over some information that we went over not too long ago. I'm giving you an update on the PFAS efforts, which Tracy alluded to. And, these are going to be very important, not only in the short term for what we're seeing on our drinking water side, but in terms of our effluent and groundwater recharge, it's going to become more significant in the future for treating flows from our treatment plant. We don't know what that's going to look like yet. This is kind of the first step in it. So just real briefly what we talked about before, the first slide. Thanks. So when we came to you with this back in, I believe, in October and again in December, we talked about it a little bit. EPA was drafting groundwater quality standards for PFAS, and they haven't done that yet. They had anticipated they would be done by the end of last year. They are not done. They are still saying they believe they're going to be out here within the first half of this year. And so those will be draft limits, and then maybe another year past that when they will do final limits. So we haven't seen those yet. We're still waiting for that. However, we're not waiting for those numbers to move forward with our own PFAS efforts. And so on the next slide, as you'll recall, we had 4 wells that tested positive for the PFAS chemicals that were spread throughout the town. We identified 2 of them as being prime locations for wanting to have PFAS treatment, one of them being the Little Pete well due to the size of the well, the other one being the Quailwood 3, even though it's a much smaller well than Little Pete. It's the largest one that we have down in the southern part of town. And so those two wells, we're looking at what we can do on site. The other thing is the injection well that Tracy alluded to, which is right in the center of town, will need some type of treatment, and it's going to be different than what's going on in the drinking water wells because it is treated effluent. It has other things in it, higher carbon and other compounds that make the treatment different. So we're going to see what that looks like as well. And so with these three locations, we do have a couple of options. With Little Pete, we have the option of blending versus treatment. Quailwood 3, we don't have that option. It's going to be treatment, and then groundwater injection also be treatment. I want to show you just a couple of slides just to put it in your mind, kind of what this equipment looks like. And you can see that two of these systems that they're showing up here appear to be in like cargo containers. And that's kind of what we're looking at for this, because we don't know where EPA is going right now. We want to try it. So we're looking at mobile systems that we can bring in a container and put it on site. We're also looking for systems that we can expand, put another container next to it, pipe them together so we can either expand them or move them to other facilities in the future if we find another area where we need to use them. And so this is what potentially they're going to look like. We talked about the North Plains blending option, or sorry, not North Plains, North Wellfield. Currently, we provide water in two different directions from the North Wellfield. To do a blending, we would have to shut the pipe going into the viewpoint with the green arrows up there. The next slide, I believe, shows that. So we would block that off. We would direct the water south. And then at the Legendary well site down there close to 89A, we could put a storage tank and treatment at that location. So we're just mixing from the other 4 wells that are in that area. So it could be just mixing to lower it because we have lower concentrations or no PFAS in those other wells, so it would reduce the overall concentration, or we could do that and also do some treatment as well. Next slide. This shows what potentially that blending facility, schematically might look like at the Legendary site. And so finally, in December, you entered into a contract with Jacobs, who is our contract operations company. They're going to be looking at different alternatives and conceptual designs. They're going to prepare budgetary cost estimates and give us some thoughts as to where we might want to go, and we'll make those decisions. At that point, we'll have enough information to submit an application to WIFA for funding, hopefully low interest loans, but also with either grant or principal forgiveness component to them. And also we'll submit applications to DWR for the permitting. We're currently in the data gathering stage, but I've been told that they do anticipate having something completed for us probably around the end of April. So it's on a fairly fast track, and we are going to work with them to get information so that we can get going into those funding cycles with WIFA. I already talked about this, especially the WIFA portions. There is another option. We've been talking to people related to or having offering public-private partnerships. So private companies that will help us fund our projects, and then we would pay them back over time. So they have advantages and disadvantages. So we're looking into those as well. And then finally, this is an item that Ivan really wanted to talk about. So there are things going on in the country related to lawsuits against the PFAS manufacturers, and we have actually joined one of those lawsuits, and we've submitted information describing what efforts we're doing and how we're going to have to be spending lots of money because of the PFAS. And so I don't know, Ivan, if you have anything you want to add or any timelines you're expecting with that.
Only thing I'd mention is that there is expected to be a trial, I'm told, in June. Whether that will actually go forward, we'll see. This is nationwide litigation. A lot of people are involved, a lot of entities are involved, and some very experienced counsel are involved. So we're anxious to hear from them as to how it goes.
All right, and I know I covered that fairly quickly, but most of this material I know you were familiar with. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take those at this time.
Council, we have anything for Mr. Wadsworth?
Where is this Legend Larry well? I see you have a,
It is just north of 89A, a little bit to the west of where Glassford Hill hits 89A. And it's actually just south of a large APS, I don't know if it's a transfer station or a transformer station that they have there. But it's just less than a quarter of a mile west of where Glassford Hill hits 89A on the north side of the road.
Thank you, Mr. Wadsworth.
Thank you.
Next up, item 2D, General Plan 2035 Implementation. Mr. Ruby, welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members. This is a planner's go-to tool in their arrow or quiver of arrows for tools. And the Prescott General Plan, as you're aware, was ratified by the voters last year. And now we're in the implementation stage. And I want to thank my colleagues for the wonderful segue to my presentation because I talk about a lot of the same things, implementation through the general plan. Okay. Oops. Now, general plan, as you all know, is a great big vision picture of our community, what we would like it to see, what the council would like to see over the planning horizon, what the community would like to see. And it starts at about 40,000 feet and it works downward to the implementation strategies, some of which were talked about tonight. First is a vision statement. What does the council and the community want to see over the next 10 years for their community? Then it goes down to a guiding principle. And the principle is just a direction statement that further defines that vision statement, if you will. We are then down to a goal, which is a direction setter. From that direction setter, we go to a policy, which is a specific statement of decision-making. And from there, we go to an implementation strategy. And that strategy can be a specific action, procedure, project, program, or technique, some of which you've experienced here tonight. And as we move on to implementation, did I go the wrong way? Basically, there's several tools available and numerous tools available for implementation of a general plan. The first is zoning and subdivision ordinances. And as you know, we're in the midst of revising Chapter 13, the zoning ordinance at this time. Upon completion of that, we hope to launch into Chapter 14, the subdivision ordinance. Capital improvement plans. You've heard all about that tonight, so I don't need to get into that. You know what your approvals do through the capital improvement plans. The next is specific or area plans. We've been asked to look at a State Route 69 corridor overlay district, and that's what staff is working on now. Revitalization plans are also part of the tools. Public-private partnerships, which you've heard about tonight as well, are part of that. And the biggest thing, I think, is interagency coordination, coordinating with, for example, the Upper Verde River Coalition, the Yavapai County Climate Coalition, things of that nature at the local, county, regional, and state level. And as we start looking, this is just an example of what green infrastructure might be. Our general plan talks about green infrastructure, green development, green infrastructure. And green infrastructure can be anything from conservation areas, i.e. the Glassford Hill acquisition, all the way down to permeable pavement, which is a different story. We won't go there tonight, but we'll talk about some of the other things that are important. And some of those things that are green infrastructure are things like that can be done at the local level. And the thing about green infrastructure is that it is a nature-based approach to stormwater management. Smaller in scale to what you're looking at the Broad City scale, but it is a way to capture stormwater runoff and to help ingest it, if you will, into the local community. How can that be done? Well, that can be done by a number of ways. One is bioswales, which are small retention ponds, if you will, that are planted with native plants that allow the water to percolate and permeate and percolate into the ground. Others are things like green roofs. Several places have allowed green roofs, which capture the water and allow it to stay instead of running off into the gutter. Other things can include things like rain gardens. Rain gardens are similar to bioswales. They're just a little bit bigger in nature. We also have things like rain barrels that individuals can do at their own homes. So what we're talking about green infrastructure is kind of things that can be done not only in residential projects, but also in larger development projects to help retain and capture some of that water before we put it into the gray infrastructure and allow it to go down the curb so we can recharge it somewhere else. So it's just a way of attempting to have different ways to recharge and allowing people to do that. I want to keep it brief, and there's probably more discussion we can have at a later date if the council's so inclined, but I'd be glad to answer any questions at this time if you have them.
Council, we have anything for Mr. Ruby? I want to say great job, sir, and I know it was brief, but this is something that hasn't been discussed from this point of view for this town and the direction that we're going. The kind of theme tonight is all about water, how important it is, and what we're doing for a better future of conservation. So,
And if I may, Mr. Mayor, from the planner standpoint, I appreciate staff is actually looking at the general plan and implementing things from the general plan and using that as our guide, as our basis, our roadmap to the future. Thank you.
is Mr. Rodriguez, are we handling 2E or are we not doing 2E? All right, folks, we're done for now. Stick around, 19 minutes. We're back at it.